Hello everyone, welcome to Friday and welcome to another TechSnack. Today we are going to talk about canvases. So today we are going to talk a lot about art and other things, how we as front-end engineers can work with canvases, what it is and other things. So my name is Pavel, I'm an engineering manager at EPAM, and for the past I don't even remember how many years I worked with several projects which actually used canvases a lot. At least one project was fully built on canvases, and on some of them we also used them a lot to actually improve our system. So to start with, we probably need to actually mention the main theory, and the main theory is actually like what is a canvas, what we are going to talk about. So the first one, what is a canvas? Canvas is actually kind of a combination of an HTML element and its connected API. So by default, if you want to introduce canvas to your application, you just need to add an HTML tag, and then you need to kind of connect to it. So HTML by default provides you some API to work with canvas. It provides you a lot of different nested methods. It provides you a way to work with context, and it's actually allowing you to work not only with 2D, but also with some 3D graphics. So as you might imagine, Canvas is actually about kind of drawing something. So in most cases, when you are working with canvases, you are not kind of directly inserting some text. You are not inserting some numbers. Well, you can, but mostly you are just kind of specifying what you are going to draw, how you are going to draw, and then you draw it. So it's very important to mention that when you are working with canvases, you're not working with canvas by default. Like, you are not working with it as you are working with DOM elements. When you are kind of connecting to a specific element, you are introducing some new elements inside this canvas. You mainly just set up a connection through context, and the context itself is like a context object that provides you all the methods and properties which will allow you to actually communicate with canvas. So you will set up a connection between your code and this like visual element. So you will be able to configure it, you will be able to draw some shapes, communicate with pixels and so on. And there are two major contexts. So as I mentioned, there are 2D and 3D. I think today we are mostly going to speak about 2D, mainly because 3D it's kind of a separate world and it's much larger talk, so we'll skip this. It's very important to mention that like why Canvas is so important in terms of performance is usually because it allows you to work with CPU better. It sometimes allows you to actually work with graphic cards, so you can actually use other kind of technologies, other ways to draw something, and it's just much faster and much easier for your computer to draw something rather than actually building a full tree, inserting something, comparing some elements, and so on. So you're not definitely working with a specific static elements. You are working with just one like one canvas. So you're mainly working with pixels. It's also very important to mention that when you're working with canvases, you can actually work with specific pixels. So for those who previously worked with some desktop applications, you might probably know that on different levels, you can actually work on a very low level when you can specify and render some visual element in your computer, or you can work with some high-level elements. So in terms of like a comparison, I might say that JavaScript is quite close to a high level. It does not provide you like very major methods that will allow you to render something really, really huge. But you can actually build your own methods, and we are going to talk about this based on some examples. So let's talk about some simple implementations, and let's start with like the minor one, something Very, very simple. So you can actually draw something in just a couple of lines of code. So first you need to configure your canvas. So in this example, we are not providing this canvas element directly inside HTML, meaning that, we are not specifying it as a part of HTML. We dynamically build it. So we just create an HTML element canvas. We are appending it to our body. And then we are specifying our width and height. Of course, if you're working with HTML directly, it's not required, meaning that you can just put an HTML element inside. You can configure everything with CSS. So this is just one part that is showing you that similar to other HTML elements, Canvas is the same. You can just configure it. You can work with any parameters similar to how you're working with other HTML elements. The second step, which is very important, you actually get a context. So you basically set up kind of an API connection to your canvas, and then you can do whatever you want. And each time when you're building something, like when you're doing something with the canvas, it will actually apply these changes to the canvas. So in this example, we do have 2 lines of code. The first one, specify fill style. And when we specify this fill style, we are not directly changing something in Canvas. We are just configuring this as a variable, as a setting. And then we know that when we are running the next command that will somehow fill our canvas, it will use the previous configuration. So we are calling a method which will just draw a rectangle in our canvas. And that's it. You will just see a simple rectangle based on some coordinates, and it will be filled with red color. So there are a lot of different internal methods. So in case if you want to render like any type of content that you probably need, you mostly communicate with some shapes. So I'm specifying here just 5 methods, something very basic and something that we are mostly using. So we can draw a rectangle with this method, with fill method. We're basically trying to not only draw it, but also fill it with some color. So we are specifying coordinates and we are specifying sizes. So it's like a width and height. Actually very similar to how you will just draw something in other systems. You can just draw it with a stroke style, meaning that inside it will not be filled with specific color, but rather it will just kind of draw this like line. So you're specifying the width of the line, you're specifying the color of this line, and again, you're just setting some parameters like position from which you will start this drawing, and the actual size. The very important thing here, so each block that I'm showing to you right now, these are kind of like isolated, meaning that if you will, for example, write this code one after another, you need to remember that like all styles that we are specifying, like fill style, will not be automatically reset to any default state, meaning that if you will set fill style to red and then after several lines of code you will try to actually fill something else, it will by default fill it with red, meaning that you need to specify some parameters each time when you're doing something. So imagine that you are working with, I don't know, paint application. So you need to choose which color to use. You need to understand like what will be the position, and you need to kind of draw it. So very similar in the code. Of course, if you are working with some shapes, sometimes you need to provide some very custom shapes. So there are some methods for this. So you can actually draw a line. You can actually draw a circle. So there are methods of arc method, which allows you to actually draw a circle. You can build a complete path to draw a line. And the interesting thing here, like when you are working with a path, you kind of starting writing something or like starting providing this line. And again, very similar to other systems, when you are drawing some line, you basically just specify the path and then you kind of complete it. So you can move through coordinates and you can then stroke, so it will be actually drawn. And the last method which I want to show in this section is about the text. So of course it's very important to be able to draw some text. So you can see here that we can specify the color for this text, we can specify the font, and then we are able to actually write down the specific text. So we are providing it, and we are providing also some coordinates. Potentially, the problem here is that, as you can see, we do have only two numbers, which means that you are working with coordinates, so you cannot kind of do a very dynamic logic similar to DOM element. So you cannot specify that this will be kind of a rectangle, so you need to draw a text inside this rectangle without like additional logic, because by default, as a context, similar to how you're drawing something on a paper, basically it does not know any like dynamic details, so it does not know what you actually want to apply to this. So there are, as I mentioned, a lot of different things which you can do with Canvas. So you can, of course, draw a lot of different shapes. You can specify some parameters. You can render text. You can actually draw images. So in case if you want to, for example, just like put some specific already predefined image in your Canvas, it's also possible. And you can also apply some patterns. A little bit mentioning one of the real project. For example, we had a functionality that actually drawn some sort of tiles on the kitchen. So our goal was to actually draw a different like shapes or different patterns of these tiles. And what we did, we actually just specified a specific pattern that we used to kind of fill our canvas or a part of the canvas with a specific pattern. So instead of just kind of preparing an image for a specific tile, we basically just used it to fill this canvas completely with a specific pattern. It's also possible to do some transformations, so we can actually kind of work with our canvas similar to how we are working with Paint, which means that we can kind of choose some specific area, we can somehow transform this area, we can set alpha transparency, we can even make some animations there, which again, like not similar to how we will do this in DOM because we don't have direct CSS support. However, it's actually very helpful when you're doing a lot of dynamic things. You can manipulate with specific pixels, or like by this I don't mean that you actually need to choose each specific pixel. You can specify some area and you can, for example, clear a specific area. You can just redraw a part of the canvas, so you don't need to actually render everything from scratch, and you can actually handle some events. So in case if you want to communicate with your canvas, let's imagine that we are developing some game, you basically need to make sure that when you click on specific place in your canvas, it will understand that you clicked there. So it actually supports some clicks, movements, and other things, so you can provide some interaction. There are actually several tricks how you can work with canvases, because it's clear that it's not always about just drawing some shapes. Sometimes you probably want to draw, for example, a table, and you can actually do this. Well, you can see that it's probably not the best way, and you can also see that you usually don't put the table inside an SVG. However, as I mentioned, since you can actually draw an image inside the canvas, you can extend your SVG image with a specific HTML and you can draw it. But the main problem with this approach is that it's a canvas. It does not know anything about some specific parameters of your image. So mainly when you do have a size, when the content is too large, it will be drawn like you have an infinite canvas space. So basically it can draw you something like this when the part of the content will be cut. and you actually need to handle this manually. Unfortunately, you can't just provide a simple logic that will automatically update all the sizes, change the position of the content, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of different problems with canvases, especially when you're trying to use them in more complex projects. The first one is that since you are working with canvases, especially when you are inserting something, like when you are trying to draw an existing image, there might be a lot of problems with bad quality. So when I worked on one of the projects, I actually had this problem when I needed to draw a specific I needed to draw details for quite specific small image. And since the configuration that I initially provided was not very correct, the image was very blurry. So we had to actually work a lot with configuration of this context. I also remember that especially when we worked with some iOS devices, we had to make sure that we are working with correct pixel ratio, because it's also very important. Like by default, you don't have like 1 pixel per your canvas. You might have different ratio, which might also kind of provide some collision with your details. So you probably need to remember about this and like quickly check on different devices. You also need to check on different devices, because different devices are providing or like rendering the content a little bit differently. Specifically for the text, when you're working with fonts, you probably saw that when you're trying to open the same website across different browsers, you might see that it might look a little bit different. That's because different browsers are rendering fonts a little bit differently, they are calculating positions a little bit differently. So in this small example, it's almost not visible, but you can see that specifically for Chrome, you do have more space here, like in the middle of this letter. And we still have a little bit of space at the top, while, for example, in Firefox, we don't have things like this. So we need to remember that browsers are changing like almost every week. So we need to make sure that we are handling this. And if you are working with something that should be like 100% the same, you probably need to consider some other alternative ways to rendering, or you need to actually play with some configurations to make sure that this one will be the same. And the last problem that I'm going to mention today, again, like similar to Paint, but unfortunately, because in Paint at least you have undo, we don't have undo in canvases, meaning that if you draw something, you are actually living with what you draw. So basically, when you're doing some operations, you need to make sure that each time when you need to redraw something, when you need to change the state, you need to actually clear this canvas and redraw it again. So this operation, when you're actually kind of clearing this and drawing something new, is quite well, I cannot say quite popular, but it's something that you will do a lot. So usually there are several ways how to handle this. The first one is actually finding a specific place which you need to redraw. Or the second one, you can actually do several canvases. So on one of our projects, we actually implemented, I think, around 8 canvases for different purposes. And we used them to actually draw different parts, and we communicated with them a little bit differently. So Canvas is not like a picture that completely hides the content that is below this canvas. It's actually allowing you to draw some parts and making sure that you are building kind of layers of canvases. So the very important question is, why do we actually need canvases? Like yeah, I know, like some projects, of course, are using them, but what are real purposes? So the first one is that you can actually draw some kind of dynamic images, interactive binaries and other things. So you basically don't need to build a lot of HTML elements and somehow communicate with them. You can visually draw something. Before it was only possible with some, I don't know, GIF images. Right now you can dynamically build something. You can even make some sort of like game-like banner, something that you will be able to communicate with, to interact with. And it's very cool for some specific projects. You can process an image. So if you will try to kind of Google some examples of Canvas, you will find a lot of examples when you are inserting some image, like you are uploading some image, and then you are applying some filters to it, you're applying some different colors and other things. So it's actually possible to do so with the native browser functionality. The next one is work with visual data. So a lot of us are currently working with data, and it's always important to actually find a nice way to represent the data. So of course, in most cases, we are just using some chart libraries, but sometimes you don't need to actually work with charts because you don't need to communicate with them. So you can basically just draw them, and it will be much faster if you will, for example, try to render a giant table in which each specific row will have a chart. If you will try to do so with a library, for example, with HighChart library, it might actually spend a lot of time to actually just render the whole table. If you will draw this with Canvas, it will be much faster. You can sometimes optimize a large amount of data. So one of my projects was a trading system. And the idea was that we are actually getting a lot of trades, a lot of new requests. So we had to draw all of them. And once our QA automation team applied the logic that actually ran kind of 1 million requests per second, which actually just destroyed browser. Because when you're trying to build 1 million of DOM elements, or even more DOM elements, because it's not just the text, it's usually just a text, a number, maybe a small graphic, some sort of chart. It's very painful. So we actually was able to fix this quite easily with not only optimizing the amount of data that we received and that we tried to render, but also with just drawing this information with Canvas. It was very, very smooth, and it was not very complicated to actually implement. There are also some more specific applications, for example, Mirror, something that most of us probably either using or at least heard about this. If you will just open Mirror and check the actual source code, you will see that they are working with Canvas, because you need to interact between multiple users. You need to interact with a lot of elements. So Canvas is a good solution for this. Of course, some things like game development and more specific tools like scientific simulations and educational tools, barcode and QR code generation, and any application that might actually show you some visual elements. So I'm going to stop at this point. So my goal was to actually show you some basics of Canvas. I might actually recommend you to try to play with canvases, because it provides you a lot of different things that you can do. It's a very interesting new world, and I hope that it was helpful for you, and that it probably might help you in your future projects. So thank you very much. We are going to switch to some questions, and I can see some of them already. So the first question: is there anything we should pay attention to when we mount a canvas in a React app? So let me try to remember. So I worked with React and with a canvas. By default, when you are providing a connection to this element, like when you're working with context, you're not directly communicating with an HTML element, meaning that if you do have an element already, it will be the same, so there should not be any problems. I don't remember any problems specifically related to ways when we kind of re-implemented this element, and right now React support a lot of caching and other things, so I don't think there should be any problems. If we will try to think about some potential high-level APIs or other things that might be helpful for React, I don't know anything right now. Like I might say that probably just default API should be enough to actually work with it. So most probably whenever you are working with React, Angular, Vue.js or other systems, in all cases, the code will be the same. So the next question, how can we use Chrome DevTools to affect the canvas, change WebGL settings? My problem here is that I haven't worked much with WebGL, so it might be hard for me to answer the specific question. But overall, when you're communicating with Canvas, especially when you're working with different devices, there are device settings which actually allowing you to configure pixel ratio, to configure other settings. So I remember that last time when I worked with it, I used Chrome settings specifically related to different devices quite a lot, because when you're configuring this, it actually tells your browser how to work with it differently. But sorry, I cannot tell much about WebGL specifically. And the next question about several canvases. Sometimes it's better to have multiple virtual canvases and one visible one. It's more difficult to operate, but the rendering becomes easier. That's 100% true. So it's interesting topic in terms of at which point you actually need to have multiple canvases and at which point you actually need to work with one. So we actually had a problem when we tried to implement too many canvases, when we tried to kind of separate the work between them. We actually had the problem that the CPU usage was too huge. So it was a problem for us, and also it might become a problem when you actually need to synchronize state of your application. So I might say that usually, like when you are working with canvases, you need to think about two things. First, you need to think what exactly is currently drawing, like which part you are drawing to, how you are communicating with it. Do you actually need to communicate with multiple things at the same time? And the second part, you need to think about possible ways how you can actually synchronize between different instances, because it's even possible to actually work with web workers. So you can specify a web worker that will do something for you and then just provide you an additional result. So yeah, I agree that when you are working with them, you don't need to physically have several canvases. You can use other techniques. And one more question. Can we use more SVG graphics in Canvas to avoid bitmap problems? Is it worse? So if you hope that using of SVG will fix all the problems that bitmaps might have, unfortunately, with canvases, you might have problems with everything. Canvases are very powerful, meaning that you can actually draw a lot of nice things and you can configure visual part very nicely. However, when you are trying to just draw some images inside Canvas, sometimes it might be more problematic rather than just adding them to the DOM. I would say that with SVG specifically, it might be better when you already have something predefined. And for example, if you kind of just working with the state and just drawing it inside the canvas. I would just recommend to play with it. I would recommend to actually check different options. So in most cases, you will not actually directly render some image inside the canvas. In most cases, you will just insert a specific part, especially if you don't want to draw it manually, because it's, of course, much easier, especially when you need to reuse, for example, your company logo, which might be quite complicated. Will you have a problem with it? Well, not guaranteed, but I cannot say 100% because, as I mentioned already, there are a lot of browsers, there are a lot of different problems, so you need to actually check across multiple systems to make sure that your solution is working as expected. And okay, I think that's it. So we're running out of time and I don't see any more questions. So thank you everyone who listened. Thank you everyone who asked some questions. So it was a pleasure to talk to you. And as a reminder, again, we are always looking for more presenters. So if you want to present some cool idea, please contact Volha. And in case if you have more questions, you can write them in comments and I will try to answer them offline. Thank you everyone and have a great Friday. Bye.